Hey friends, welcome back to another video, or welcome if you're new here. I'm currently filming this on the 13th of March and spring is in just a week's time, so I thought I would celebrate by making this video for you guys about spring book recommendations. Growing up, I never really enjoyed or looked forward to spring particularly because I get really bad allergies, so I used to dread it a lot, but over the last few years I've been definitely enjoying this seasonal transition into warmer weather, into brighter, sunnier mornings. And one thing that really helps me get into a new season is reading seasonally appropriate books. So last year I posted my first ever seasonal, or maybe it was my second seasonal book recommendations list, and I still stand by everything that I shared in that video, so I'll link it now. And if you're looking for more recommendations after this one, then do go check that one out as well. I'm also currently trying to figure out this library room slash office room for me. I'm going to add some new artwork right behind me there as well. And I also bought this spider plant the other day, and it doesn't have a plant pot yet, but since it's a spring video, I thought it was very appropriate to include some sort of greenery. But I have 12 books to share with you guys in total, so I feel like it's going to be a long video. I hope you have a cozy cup of tea. I've got some green tea with me, and now let's get into the video. So I've split the video into 3 different categories because these categories are ones that I naturally gravitate towards when it comes to springtime. So we have magical middle grade, whimsical fantasy, and timeless classics. And if you guys are fans of cottagecore like I am, then I hope you like this list. There's a lot of rural imagery in a lot of the books that I'll be sharing with you guys today, and also just beautiful nature descriptions and floral magic and things like that. But our first category is magical middle grade, and I love reading middle grade all year round, but especially during springtime because I feel like the characters that are explored in middle grade are so sweet and tender, and there's such a hopeful message in a lot of the books. So the first book that we have in the category is Baker's Magic by Diane Zala. This book follows a girl called Bee, and Bee lives in a kingdom that is crumbling, and out of desperation she steals a bun from this bakery. But to her surprise, the owner of the bakery offers her a position to work with him, and so she ends up working at this bakery, and she discovers that she actually has this magical power when it comes to baking. So when a new friend ends up getting into trouble, Bee decides to use the little bit of magic that she does have for good and to help her friend out. If you're looking for a feel-good middle grade novel, I feel like this is a really sweet one to pick up because there's found family in it, there's an exploration of cozy magic and cozy descriptions of the bakery and yummy baked goods. The book has a fantasy quest plotline, and it actually reads quite like a charming fairy tale as well. The premise of the book actually really reminded me a lot of T. Kingfisher's A Defensive Guide to Wizard's Baking, or A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. But with that book, as much as I really enjoy a lot of T. Kingfisher's novels, I couldn't really get into it, and I tried reading it so many times, but I was able to really enjoy and whiz through this particular middle grade. So maybe if you've read that book and you really enjoyed it, or like me you weren't quite sure about it, then this one is a fun alternative. Technically this book takes place in autumn, but I knew that I wanted to include it in the spring list because it features this tulip farm scene with these huge fields of flowers, and that imagery just really stuck in my head, and the whole book felt like a very hopeful book to me. So that was the very first book. And this next book is one that I listened to via audiobook. I don't own a copy of it, but it's a brand new fantasy series called The Age of Enchantment by Anna James. The series is titled The Chronicles of Weatherwhy, and I'm really sad that this book hasn't gotten more love around it. It's such an incredible first book to a series that I really look forward to reading the rest from, and I wanted to include it so that you guys know about it as well. So this book takes place in Weatherwhy, and in Weatherwhy everybody is born with a seasonal magic in them. So you either have magic for spring, summer, autumn or winter, but there are a few select people who are able to wield all 4 seasons of magic, and they are known as enchanters. So when Juniper discovers that she is an enchanter, she ends up being whisked away to study enchantment at the Thistledown Academy, and her twin brother ends up enrolling into a nearby bookbindery. But the two of them get involved in a mysterious society that meets after dark, and they begin to realize that there is a lot more going on behind the scenes than they first initially thought. So this book basically has everything that I love when it comes to reading middle grade. It has a magical school, it has seasonal magic, and it also has some adorable family relationships as well as good friendships as well. It starts on the first day of spring, so of course I had to include it in the video, and I feel like the author did such a wonderful job with the world building as well. I love being able to read about how the seasons intertwined with magic. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the book series develops, and I'm looking forward to the second book in the series. And I just feel that I haven't seen anybody really talking about this book, but it's really a wonderful series, and if you liked Nevermore, then I think you'll really love this one as well, so definitely go and check it out. Another great middle grade fantasy series is Hedrich by Skye McKenna. The sun is really starting to go in my eyes, but this book follows a girl called Cassie, and Cassie's mother has been missing for 7 years now, but Cassie is determined to find her mum, and so she escapes her dreary boarding school. Unfortunately, during the escapade, she ends up being chased by a pack of goblins, and she's saved by a talking cat who then leads her to this cozy village called Hedgeley. When she arrives at Hedgeley, Cassie realizes that there is this entire coven of witches who have been protecting Britain from the fairy world. I've just had to draw the curtains because I couldn't see what I was doing anymore. But if you love reading about quintessential British cozy villages and rural environments, then I really recommend Hedrich to you guys. It has forest settings, it has green academia, it has fairies, and I think my favourite aspect of this book was when Cassie was learning how to be a part of the coven, and she would undertake these really sweet classes. So she'd go foraging for mushrooms, learning how to read runes and write runes as well. In many ways, because of the way that the Fae were described in this book, it felt like a classic children's fairy tale. It has gorgeous illustrations in it, and it's also a series that I haven't heard many people talk about. So this is Hedrich by Skye McKenna. And then the only graphic novel that I have in this video is Hooky by Miriam Bonner-Strater. Hooky is a middle grade fantasy graphic novel that was initially a webtoon and then later published into book format. And this book, in terms of the actual content matter, isn't necessarily spring related, but the colour palette features lots of soft hues of pink and warm purples and fresh vibrant greens. So I thought that was really evocative of spring, and I wanted to include it here. This book follows twins Danny and Dorian, and unfortunately they miss their bus to magic school, and so ensues a whole load of mishaps and misfortunes, and they get into this huge adventure. I love the art style of Hooky, and I thought that the characters were really adorable, and there are lots of really likable personalities in it as well. I know that there are more books in this series, and I've been wanting to pick up Hooky volumes 2 and 3 for ages, but I haven't got round to those yet, so hopefully this year I will be able to pick those up as well. But before we move on to the next category, I wanted to thank Cutebee, who are sponsoring this portion of the video. Cutebee provide lots of creative items that are easy to assemble, including DIY miniature houses, booklet kits and 3D wooden puzzles. I don't know if you guys remember, but last summer I worked at Cutebee and I was so excited that they reached out again to send me their Owl Bookstore booklet kit, because I've been slowly putting together my studio / library / filming room, and I've been looking for ways to decorate the space a bit. It's such a therapeutic experience to be putting these kits together, and I love that I get to listen to audiobooks or music as I dedicate a few hours to admire these tiny pieces of art. As I work as a children's book illustrator, I find myself looking for different ways to get creative other than just drawing to fill up my creative well, which is why I initially started this channel in the first place. So having these kits to work on and let my mind rest is so relaxing and fun as well. I believe that if you use the code Ahya's Cottage, you can get 8% off your own book knit kit. So if you do purchase one, do let me know which one you picked out, and I hope you have a cozy time putting it together. Thank you again to Cute Bee for the collaboration, and now let's get back into the spring book recommendations. This next category is whimsical fantasy, and I've already shared a couple fantasy novels, but this will be mainly YA and adult. And of course I couldn't have a spring recommendations video without including some whimsical reads. So first up we have The Lantern of Lost Memories by Hanaka Hiragi. I read this book for the first time about a month ago, and ever since then I've been looking for an excuse to try and talk to you guys about it on my channel because I thought it was an incredible book. This book is a Japanese magical realism novel, and I feel like it's perfect for all the Ghibli lovers out there. It has a sense of whimsy and dreamy nostalgia that I feel like is really appropriate for spring, and it also has a really unique concept. So there's this magical photo studio run by a man called Hirasaki, but this photo studio is unique in that it serves as a sort of middle ground between life and the afterlife, and the people who come here are given a final chance to sort through all the memories that they've made, and they're able to pick out each memory and put it all into this spinning lantern. And the goal with this lantern is that when the lantern spins, all the photos of their memories will flash right before their eyes as a final sort of goodbye for them, really. In the style of many Japanese magical realism books, this book is a collection of almost short stories. It follows a different character per chapter, and there are 3 sections in total. I adored the concept of this book, and whilst I didn't really agree with some of the philosophy on life and death, I do feel like it was a really wonderful book and a really beautiful one to read about as well. It does explore some really difficult topics and dark topics as well, so it's by no means just a cozy book, but it's extremely touching, and I thought that it was really well written as well. So this is a brand new magical realism book that I'm going to be talking about very frequently, I think, on my channel. The next book we have in this section is A Fragile Enchantment by Alison Saft. I went out of my way to purchase this specific edition because I loved the cover for it, but in A Fragile Enchantment we have a dressmaker called Neve. The story is inspired by Regency England, and Neve, like I mentioned, is a dressmaker. So when she receives the opportunity one day to be able to make the wardrobe for a royal wedding of the neighbouring kingdom, she decides to take that opportunity to try and help her family. Now the fantasy element in this book is that Neve is able to stitch emotions into fabric, and so when she makes clothes, they're not like others dressmakers' clothes. I love the way that the magic was used in this book, and the ways that Neve was able to stitch and embroider emotions into fabric was such a cool concept. I loved reading about it. And this book is perfect to read in spring because of the Bridgerton vibes to it, with added bits of magic. I will say that I thought that the plot kind of went a little bit all over the place towards the end, and I remember having quite a few issues with the book in general. But if you're looking for a fun, sweet romantasy with real Regency fairy vibes, then I think this is a delightful one to pick up for its atmosphere. But another historical fantasy novel with a bit of romance in it is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. In this book, you follow Nina, and Nina strives to be like the beautiful ones who are the most prominent socialites. But she's always struggled to control her telekinesis. So when another telekinetic arrives in town, and he's called Hector, Nina is fascinated by him. And if I remember correctly, I think he offers to help her utilize her powers. So as the two spend more and more time together, Nina grows in fondness and in appreciation for him. But Hector is holding back a secret which threatens their budding relationship. This isn't your typical romance story. There's actually a very bittersweet and melancholy undertone throughout the entire book. The characters are incredibly complex, and it makes it for a very whirlwind of an experience. And I remember becoming really frustrated with certain characters in this novel because of how much I had such a visceral reaction to the ways that they were behaving. But that definitely adds to the entire book. It's actually really short, and also it's more a magical realism than heavy fantasy. The fantasy element is really light actually, so yeah, definitely more light magical realism. So if you're looking for something slightly more mature where the characters aren't squeaky clean and they have a lot of issues, then this one is a great one to pick during springtime because it starts during like the first day of spring or something like that. The last book in this particular category is The Rose Bargain by Sasha Peyton Smith, and this is a book that I recently finished and adored. This book has been pitched as The Cruel Prince meets The Selection, but I'd also definitely add Bridgerton as well. But in this book, every citizen is offered the opportunity and the rights to be able to bargain once in their lifetime with the immortal Fey Queen. It's inspired by Regency England, but there's a fairy queen on the throne. High society girls are expected to bargain with the queen for qualities that will help them to attract more suitors during the season. So that is what Ivy Benton has in mind when she has her debut as well. However, the queen surprises everybody with an unexpected twist, saying that in this particular season, her son, Prince Bram, is going to be looking for a wife. And so this season will be marked by a competition to help find Bram a wife. As soon as I finished this book, I knew that I wanted to include it on the list, and gosh, it was such a good book. I really enjoy the fairy element to it. The Fae were darker, much like in The Cruel Prince, and I thought that the fairy games and the competition was really well executed and really well thought through as well. It's inspired by Regency England again, and I just apparently love reading historical fantasy set during this particular period. It is a love triangle though, and I will say I don't know how I feel about love triangles. I used to be obsessed with it when I was a teenager, but now it just really frustrates me, and there were definitely moments throughout this book where I was just like, why? But I couldn't put this book down, and I feel like that is a sign of a really good book, and this book is so perfect to read in spring. I will also add, just because I know that a lot of you guys also appreciate reading cleaner romances, that this book had a bit of spice in it, so do keep that in mind if you're thinking of picking it up. But I believe this book is planned to be a duology, and the next book will hopefully come out next year. We've now reached the final category of this video, and for this one it's going to be timeless classics. I have 4 books to talk to you about, but 3 of these are children's classics, so I'll start with the one that isn't a children's classic, and that one is Kilmeny of the Orchard by L.M. Montgomery. I'm just going to top my tea up because I've just finished. It's kind of gone cold, but I don't mind too much. Anyways, back to the video. I can't have a spring video without mentioning an L.M. Montgomery novel, and I feel like this one is probably one that you haven't heard of. At least it's not as well known as a lot of her other books. But in this book you follow Eric, who has basically everything that you could ask for. He's handsome, he's wealthy, he's popular, but he is a bachelor, and so When his friend asks him if he'd like to substitute for him as a teacher on Prince Edward Island, Eric takes the opportunity, and so he goes to Prince Edward Island to teach. On the other side we have Kilmeny. I don't know if you pronounce her name Kilmeny or Kilmeny, but anyways, I'm going to say Kilmeny for now, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Now, Kilmeny has been sheltered her whole life because there's been a lot of scandal surrounding her birth, and there's also a lot of stigma behind the fact that she can't speak and her disability. She spends all her days helping out with her uncle and aunt's farm work, and she also plays the violin in her little spot in an orchard. So when Eric stumbles upon her orchard and she's playing the violin, the two end up sharing things that they've never shared about before to one another, and they are able to invite each other into their worlds. I really do love Ella Montgomery's writing style, and I find it so comforting and so calming, and I do think that a large part of that is because I've read quite a few Montgomery novels and I've reread them quite a few times as well, so at this point I feel quite familiar with her writing style, and it just brings such a sense of comfort for me whenever I do visit one of her books. As you can expect, the descriptions of Prince Edward Island are exquisite in this book as well, but I do want to mention that this book, and actually just a lot of classics in general, you can definitely tell that they are a product of their time. So you can definitely see the reflections of the way that people thought and the prejudice that people had in this novel as well, which is very unfortunate. And besides that, I do think that this book is probably not as strong as some of her other books. Last year I featured The Blue Castle, and I think that that is one of my favourite Ella Montgomery novels. But if you're like me and you love reading Ella Montgomery's novels, and maybe you've read the classics like Anne of Green Gables and The Blue Castle, then I think it's worth giving this book a shot as well. The next three books, like I mentioned, are all going to be children's classics, and I didn't actually read a lot of the classics growing up, so a lot of these stories are ones that I visited as an adult. I actually think I read all three of these books last year during spring, so I wanted to share them with you guys. And the very first one that we have here is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Much like Kilmeny of the Orchard, this book is very reflective of the time period that it was written in, so there are definite flaws to keep in mind, but the overall book atmosphere I adored, and I also thought that it had a really hopeful springtime message to it. In The Secret Garden, you follow a very spoiled girl called Mary Lennox, and when her parents pass away, Mary is sent to the moors of Yorkshire where her reclusive uncle lives, and it's here where she encounters lots of different characters such as her sickly cousin Colin, as well as a very cheerful little robin. And the robin helps her to come across this door that leads to a secret garden that has been unkept for years now. As she restores the garden secretly, her own heart and her own attitude and health as well begins to rejuvenate and be restored, and this also impacts those around her. So it's one of my favorite children's classics now, alongside Anne of Green Gables, and it's such a quintessential British spring that's described in this book. It was very touching to see how Mary transformed as a character. There's an air of freshness and that hopeful spring message to it, so I really recommend this book if you haven't checked it out already. The next book we have is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. This is another book that I didn't actually read as a child, and I knew of course of the story because of popular culture and the movies surrounding Peter Pan. But when I read it, I was so thankful that I finally decided to pick it up last year, because it's such a whimsical book filled with so much charm. In case you're unfamiliar with this story, we follow Peter Pan and Tinker Bell as they lead the three darling children out of their home in London, across the rooftops of London and away to Neverland, which is an island where lost boys play and fairies have mischievous adventures. And of course you also also have Captain Hook and his villainous pirate crew who are always looking for a reason to lurk around in the shadows. This book is so weird and strange in so many different ways. It's very quirky, but I found myself becoming more and more drawn into it the further it progressed. And towards the end of the book, I actually got really emotional. I felt this immediate sense of childhood nostalgia, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that J.M. Barrie actually lost his older brother, and his family and his mother grieved for him. And so the Lost Boys and this concept of never growing up and wanting to remain a child forever, I think that has a lot to do with the ways in which his own brother passed away very young. So knowing a little bit about that made it more of an emotional read, and I felt like it just made me reflect on my own childhood and all the wild things that my imagination would come up with and all the crazy adventures that I'd dream about as well. So it's a classic that I wasn't really expecting too much from and was very surprised and taken aback by how much I enjoyed it. And last but not least, we have Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Again, this was a book that I'd watched the film adaptations of but never read the actual book until last year, and I did film reading this process, so I don't know if you guys actually watched that video. But in this book we follow Alice, who one day sees a white rabbit and she decides to go follow it, and so ensues this whole crazy adventure as she encounters all sorts of strange whimsical creatures. It's such a charming and also very short read, so if you're looking for a spring book to daydream about, if it's sunny outside and you can dream about having a tea party with the Mad Hatter and whimsical creatures, then this is a really fun one to pick up this season. I love how witty and nonsensical it was, and I feel like you can really tell that Lewis Carroll had a lot of fun writing this. With a lot of these children's books, I feel like I wouldn't have appreciated them as much were I to read it as a child, and it's definitely something that I feel like I'm able to understand and appreciate more having read it as an adult. But those are all the books that I wanted to mention in today's video. Every time I read a book, I always think about which season it corresponds to the most so that I can put together these seasonal book recommendations for you guys. It's actually something that I used to do before I started my YouTube channel, and now that I can talk to you guys about it, it makes it even more fun for me. So thank you so much for watching these videos. If you feel like you guys know of any books that are perfect to read this spring and I haven't mentioned it already, please do let me know in the comments down below so that we can all share inspiration. I hope you guys have a really magical start to your spring, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye friends!